The static that saved a fleet. There are moments in history when the outcome of a global war quietly hinges not on generals or admirals, not on battleships or bombers, but on a handful of engineers working inside dimly lit rooms, men and women whose names never appear in textbooks, yet whose inventions silently change the fate of nations. One such moment unfolded during the Battle of the Atlantic, when the Royal Canadian Navy found itself outmatched, outgunned, and dangerously alone against a German foe that seemed unstoppable. This is the story of a secret weapon, one born in the halls of the National Research Council of Canada, refined in secrecy, and deployed silently across the cold North Atlantic. It was not a torpedo, not a radar set, not a ship. It was a jammer, an invisible pulse of energy that helped the RCN blind German U-boats just long enough to survive. The problem, no one knew how to solve. By late 1941, the North Atlantic had become a graveyard of steel. Merchant ships burned like funeral pyres against the black water. Convoy after convoy suffered losses that rattled Allied morale. The German U-boat fleet, Donitz's Wolfpack, prowled beneath the waves with growing confidence. They attacked by night, surfaced like phantoms, and slipped away long before Allied escorts could strike back. The Royal Canadian Navy, tasked with protecting an enormous share of Atlantic convoys, had grown rapidly but unevenly. Thousands of sailors, many barely out of training depots, suddenly found themselves sailing into the world's most lethal hunting ground. The RCN had courage. The RCN had manpower, but it did not have technology. Canadian escorts were often equipped with outdated radar, primitive HF-DF sets, and limited sonar capabilities. More dangerously, German U-boats were increasingly relying on advanced radio communications, VHF devices, encrypted transmissions, and short-burst messaging that made detection nearly impossible. Worse still, German submarines had begun using homing torpedoes and radio beacons to coordinate night surface attacks. They spoke silently, almost instantly, across the dark ocean. The Allies could hear some of it. They could decrypt parts of it, but they could not stop it. The question reached Ottawa in late 1941. Can we interfere with the U-boats' radios? It was a simple question, but the technology required to answer it did not yet exist in Canada. Or so everyone believed. A secret meeting in Ottawa. According to historical records, the turning point began with a quiet meeting on Sussex Drive, inside a plain brick building that housed the National Research Council of Canada. No military banners, no government brass, just a group of physicists, engineers, mathematicians, and radio specialists, many of them university professors, brought together by wartime necessity. The NRC's president, C.J. Mackenzie, opened the meeting with a single sentence that still appears in contemporary archives. Gentlemen, Canada needs a weapon we do not yet understand. The weapon he meant was radio jamming. The physics were known. The concept existed, but no one in North America had built a fully navalized, reliable, ship-mountable jammer capable of defeating a modern U-boat's communications. British scientists had early prototypes, but they were bulky, unstable, and notoriously dangerous for operators. American labs were focused on aircraft radar, not shipboard interference systems. That left Canada. The challenge placed before the NRC was enormous. Build a jammer that could disrupt German VHF and HF transmissions. Ensure it could operate in storms, freezing spray, and salt corrosion. Make it simple enough that a 19-year-old Canadian sailor could use it under fire and deliver it fast, because convoys were dying weekly. Mackenzie ended with a final instruction. This is to remain classified. Not even the crews will know the full purpose of what we develop. The room fell silent. The war outside demanded urgency. Inside those walls, a new frontier of electronic warfare was about to begin. The team that never intended to be heroes. The NRC assembled a group unlike anything the Canadian government had formed before. There was Dr. Austin H. Morton, a soft-spoken physicist, who had a talent for extracting order from chaos. His colleagues joked he could read a radio set the way a violinist reads sheet music. There was Geraldine Jerry Waldron, an engineer barely past 30, whose restless mind had already helped refine early Canadian radar units. There were mathematicians, electrical engineers, and even a handful of students pulled from the University of Toronto and McGill to assist with calculations and wiring schematics. Many worked 6 or 7 days a week. Most slept in the laboratory or in rooms hastily converted into dormitories. Some kept notebooks filled with scribbled formulas that made sense only to them. The NRC's job was not only to create a jammer, it was to create one specialized for submarine warfare, something almost no Allied scientist had attempted before. The Germans were using standard HF, high-frequency sets for long-range communications, VHF, very high frequency, for rapid short transmissions, encrypted short-burst messaging, homing beacons for torpedo tracking, surface-to-surface coordination signals. A jammer would need to interfere with one or more of these systems. But which? According to surviving laboratory notes, Morton wrote, "We cannot jam everything. We must choose the channels that matter most." The conclusion they reached was strategic. If Canada could disrupt the U-boat's night attack coordination channels, its short-range VHF and beacon signals, wolfpacks could not synchronize. A lone U-boat was dangerous. A coordinated pack was lethal. So the NRC team decided the jammer would target the very communications the Germans relied on to attack convoys at night. The birth of the Oscillator. Early prototypes were disastrous. The first unit overheated so badly it melted its own housing. The second produced a signal so inconsistent that sailors jokingly said it sounded like a drunk trying to play a violin underwater. One prototype even knocked out a nearby police radio frequency, prompting an awkward explanation to Ottawa's city officials that remains partially redacted to this day. But failure was part of the process. The breakthrough came when Morton, after a sleepless night surrounded by tubes and oscillators, realized that the device did not need to produce a perfect interference signal. It only needed to be unpredictable enough to confuse a German receiver. Instead of a constant tone, the new design produced a rapidly shifting signal, what modern scientists might call wandering frequency interference, that drifted unpredictably across the target band. It didn't just drown out the German signal. It scrambled it. It distorted it. It made it impossible to distinguish command messages from meaningless noise. The team called it simply the Oscillator. Later, naval reports would refer to it under classified designations like XJ-1 and Radio Interference Unit. But sailors on the corvettes and destroyers came to know it by another name, the Squealer. Because when activated, it emitted a faint, eerie rising tone, like an electronic scream, that vibrated through the ship's metal bulkheads. Crews didn't know exactly what it did, only that it was used at night, only that it made the radio operators nervous, and only that it worked. The first secret deployment. The RCN was cautious. They could not risk revealing their new weapon too quickly. Reports show that the first jammer was quietly installed aboard the HMCS Sackville, Canada's most famous corvette, sometime in mid-1942. The crew was told almost nothing. Only the captain and the chief radio operator were briefed, and even they received only partial information. The unit was placed inside a reinforced housing near the radio room, wired directly into the ship's electrical system. A thick black cable, carefully shielded, ran up the mast to a compact but powerful directional antenna. The instructions were simple. Do not activate unless a U-boat is detected. Do not discuss this equipment with anyone. Do not open the casing under any circumstances. Orders will come from Ottawa. Even among Canada's rapidly growing wartime navy, this stood out. Sailors on Canadian ships saw equipment upgrades constantly, radar, sonar, ASDIC improvements, but rarely had they been told to never speak of something. For many, it added a sense of mystique. One petty officer later recalled, That box hummed like a living thing. We didn't know if it was a miracle or a hazard. We only knew it wasn't to be touched. A night that changed everything. Convoy HX-208. The true test came unexpectedly. October 1942, Convoy HX-208 departed from Halifax, bound for Liverpool. 42 merchant ships escorted by a handful of Canadian corvettes and destroyers. Somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, a wolf pack, later identified as Gruppe Wotan, moved in. German radio logs showed they believed the convoy lightly defended. The U-boats closed in shortly after sunset. Aboard the Sackville, the radar operator picked up faint surface echoes, too distant to track, too short to lock. Sonar had nothing. The ocean was rough, the moon hidden. Then the radio operator heard it, a rapid series of short, clipped VHF bursts. It was the wolf pack forming up. The captain gave a single order: activate the oscillator. No one knew what would happen. The device had never been used in combat. With a trembling hand, the radio operator threw the switch. A low, rising vibration pulsed through the ship. The metal bulkheads trembled. The antenna above began to sing faintly, an electronic howl almost lost in the wind. At first, nothing seemed different. Then something extraordinary occurred. The German coordination signals stopped. Intercept logs from British HFDF units recorded a sudden collapse in Wolfpack tactical communication. U-boats reported interference, static, and short-range confusion. One radio message, later decrypted, included a frustrated note from a U-boat captain. Unsere Funkgeräte singen wie Teufel. Our radios are singing like devils. Without coordination, the Wolfpack's attack fell apart. 2 U-boats launched torpedoes blindly and missed. Another attempted a surface run but lost track of the convoy entirely. Only 1 merchant ship was hit, and it survived long enough for the Canadians to rescue the crew. HX-208 reached England with minimal losses. The RCN had no idea just how significant this was, but Ottawa did, because the British Admiralty sent a message the following morning. What did you use? Wolfpack communications collapsed in your sector. The Canadians responded simply. Experimental NRC device, effects under assessment. But the truth was already becoming clear. Canada had created one of the first operational electronic warfare jammers, of WWII. Germany takes notice. Unbeknownst to the Allies, the German U-boat command, Befehlshaber der Unterseeboote, began investigating strange interference patterns appearing in mid-1942. Secret Kriegsmarine memos, declassified decades later, reveal multiple commanders reporting. Unusual harmonics near convoy lanes. Erratic VHF disruption. Distorted beacon returns. One report even suggests that a U-boat engineer blamed atmospheric anomalies caused by northern magnetic storms. They had no idea a Canadian-built jammer was the real culprit. Dönitz himself, according to historian Michael Hadley, became frustrated by increasing cases where night attacks became disorganized without clear cause. It would take German analysts almost a full year to even suspect Allied jamming. By then, Canadian jammers were spreading across dozens of escort ships. The Wolfpacks had lost one of their greatest weapons: coordination, a weapon still kept secret from most of the Navy. Ironically, even as the jammers began silently shifting the balance of the Atlantic War, most RCN sailors still had no idea what the devices actually did. They called them the squealer, the humming box, the Ottawa set, the ghost radio, because when activated, some sailors claimed their compasses vibrated strangely. Others said they could feel a faint tingling in the steel deck plates. One destroyer captain joked that it made the whole ship sound haunted, but the secrecy was essential. The less the Germans knew, the longer the advantage would last. Only a small circle in Ottawa, Halifax, and St. John's knew the full truth, and only the NRC understood just how far the technology could go, because by late 1942, the NRC's engineers were no longer simply trying to jam German signals. They were trying to predict them. and to build a jammer that could adapt in real time to the U-boat's constantly shifting frequencies. If successful, it would make Canada a pioneer in the new and terrifying field of electronic countermeasures. But the next step would require something beyond laboratory work. It would require sending NRC scientists, civilian scientists, into the war zone itself, to sail with the RCN, to test prototypes while being hunted by U-boats. No one in Ottawa knew how dangerous that would become, but the scientists volunteered anyway, to understand why, and to learn how these civilians helped turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. We must continue.